What is up? GoodMicWork back at you with the 19th installment of my pay-per-view and DVD reviews. In recent years, when we approach a Big Four pay-per-view, I usually try to come up and give you a pay-per-view review or two related to the show that we're coming up on. So I figured this time around, since this year's Royal Rumble is right around the corner in a few days and it is returning to the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, Texas for the first time in 20 years, what better pay-per-view to review than the last time the Royal Rumble was in the Alamo Dome back in 1997, nearly 20 years ago to the day. The very fact that 1997 was 20 years ago scares me shitless, but that's completely beside the point. This show I think is going to be really fun to review because it was a much different time back then. And I have a lot of fond memories of this show and the build to this show, and I really wouldn't even rank this Royal Rumble as one of the best ever, but to me it occupies a pretty significant place in my Royal Rumble memories. And the event definitely had its moments and had some pretty cool things take place, and it was very significant and historic in a lot of ways, even though myself and a lot of us probably had a lot more Royal Rumbles that we enjoyed better. As a matter of fact, I have reviewed a few Royal Rumbles in the past. I did this last year. I think I reviewed, or maybe it was the year before, I forget, but I reviewed my two favorite Royal Rumbles in history, 1992 and 2001. The links are up in the top right-hand corner there if you want to take a look. I also put those videos up on my website a couple of days ago to kind of make the announcement of this video and to get you in the mood for the Royal Rumble. Speaking of my website, GoodMicWorkCommentaries.com, please take a look at that. You can find all of my links to everything I do over there. You can watch this YouTube video over there. You can download an MP3 of the audio if you want to listen to it in podcast form. I'm also on Stitcher Radio. I'm also on iTunes. So you have plenty of options and ways to listen to me. Also follow me on social media at GoodMicWork on Twitter and like my Facebook page. So now that that's all out of the way, let's dive in to the Royal Rumble 1997. Like I said, it emanated from San Antonio, Texas in the Alamo Dome. And I remember at the time being really skeptical as to whether or not WWE could even fill a dome during this time. I mean, wrestling was still in its downtime. It was getting hotter. The NWO was formed back in the summer of 96. WCW had taken over the ratings and was kicking the WWE's ass pretty consistently by this point, but wrestling still wasn't as hot as it was about to get. It was just kind of bubbling, so I was worried if either company at this point could really draw a crowd like that, but especially the WWE. So they were hinging the whole pay-per-view on the big hometown return of Shawn Michaels, challenging for the WWE title, defending the honor of his manager that was attacked and beaten up back in Madison Square Garden. He had his parents in the front row. All of his friends and family were there. That's what they were basing this whole pay-per-view on as far as selling it out. I remember watching one of Jim Cornette's, many shoot interviews that he does, and he talked about this show. And I think he was saying something along the lines of Vince McMahon was really trying to prove a point, letting WCW know that he can still draw a big crowd, letting the world know that he can still draw a big crowd, and the WWE is still the king of sports entertainment. And I remember back then the hotline reports were talking about how heavily papered this show was. I mean, the only way they were going to be able to fill an arena this large is to give away a shit ton of tickets. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but I know they gave away thousands. A lot of people got in this show for free, and they still really didn't sell it out. I mean, the crowd picture, as you see here, is very impressive. But there were still a lot of empty seats around the upper areas and some pockets of emptiness here or there. So it's not like the show was sold out or anything. But still, given the circumstances, I was pretty happy with the size of that crowd. I remember thinking about how devastating it would be if there was only 20,000 people there or something like that. So I was glad to see that even if they had to give away some tickets, they were still able to put a lot of asses in seats for this show, especially during this time and especially during their war with WCW. I remember watching this live on pay-per-view. It was tradition in my house to have a couple of friends over every single month to watch these pay-per-views. Most of the time, it would be an absolute minimum of 3 of us, and sometimes as many as 12 of us. So there was always a handful of people coming over. I would host this thing every time. We would drink beer. If it was the summertime, we would grill out. If it was the wintertime, we would order pizza. And we just hang out and have a good time watching these pay-per-views. And it's some of the happiest times in my life that I can remember. And as a matter of fact, when I was making my notes for this pay-per-view and going back and rewatching it, I actually watched my original copy that I recorded right off of TV on my VCR, included the free-for-all and everything. Now, the free-for-all, for those of you who don't remember, that was pretty much WWE's pre-show back in the day, and that used to air on the preview channel. And I'll tell you what, man, kids today will never understand what some of us had to go through, and they have no concept of what the preview channel even is. But, you know, that's how you had to order pay-per-views back in the day. Back then, you had to call it in. There wasn't even an interactive thing. I wasn't even ordering this on my remote control yet. You had to physically call the cable company a few days in advance and order this thing, and just hope that they pressed the right button so when the pay-per-view aired on Sunday, it would actually come on. As a matter of fact, I can think of at least twice when I had people over and the cable company fucked up, and even though I ordered the pay-per-view, something happened and it didn't air, and I was calling frantically, but it was Sunday and they were closed, and we had to relocate. We had to jet all the way over to my friend's house, and he had like a satellite dish, and he was able to call in and order it for us, and we missed like the first hour. We had to do this like twice. So things were very different back in the day. There was no WWE Network. It wasn't a click of your mouse and you're watching the pay-per-view. You actually had to do some work. I actually had 2 VCRs hooked up to my TV at the same time back then, and my buddy would split the cost of the pay-per-view with me, and he would bring his own VHS tape over, and we would both record it. So he was able to leave my house with a copy of the pay-per-view in his hand, and it's how we did things back then. Now, there was only one match that was aired for this, and that was the Mexican Minis match. And this thing was pretty damn hilarious. This is when they had the Mini Vader and the Mini Goldust and the Mini Mankind. They even had a Mini La Parca, which was funny. They called him La Parquita. And I always remember cracking up. I'm like, why does WWE have a mini WCW guy on their roster? It was crazy. This was back when WWE started the working relationship with AAA. WCW had already been capitalizing on all of the international talent and forming the great cruiserweight division in WCW. And they were way ahead of WWE in terms of branching out and doing other things and bringing in international talent. And they had signed pretty much everybody that was worth anything to their roster. And they had an awesome kick-ass cruiserweight division. And we were seeing some amazing matches from guys like Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio and Dean Malenko and all sorts of guys over there. In WWE, they were late to the party. So I think their attempt to compete with that is starting a working relationship with AAA, which AAA is a very legendary promotion, and a lot of great Mexican wrestlers had worked there, but they weren't to the caliber athletically, and the action that they were giving you in the ring was not comparing to what WCW was doing in the cruiserweight division. It just wasn't. And it was something that fell pretty flat. And I don't even remember how long the relationship lasted, but I don't think it was any more than a couple of months. But one area where the WWE did feel like they could compete with WCW's fast-paced cruiserweight division was with the Minis. There were also 2 dark matches that weren't shown on the free-for-all or anything that involved a lot of AAA guys, and one of the guys in those matches was Perro Aguayo Jr., who tragically died just, last year. He was only 17 years old at the time of his match, and to the best of my knowledge, that might have been one of the only times he was ever in a WWE ring, but pretty young kid. He had only been driving a car for about a year at the time of that match, so fucking crazy. Moving on to the main card now, I was immediately rewarded for watching the original pay-per-view broadcast when the opening of the show had all sorts of audio difficulties that they corrected in the home video release. WWE was making a big deal about their commentary teams. As a matter of fact, on the free-for-all, Todd Pettengill was in the ring, showing the French guys and the Spanish guys and the American guys. So they had at least 3 different sets of commentating teams that would broadcast in the respective language or whatever. So when they go on air, you're supposed to hear the American commentators welcome you to the show and announce and show the other commentators and introduce the fans to them and all of that. Well, what happens is all of the wires start getting crossed, and I think you're hearing the Spanish guys. So the camera is showing Vince and JR and Jerry Lawler talking, but you're hearing the Spanish guys, Hugo Siminovich and Carlos Cabrera and whoever the hell else was over there. And this wouldn't be the only time they would have technical difficulties in this show either. I think just being in a building this size, it's something that WWE hadn't done in a while, and putting the whole thing together, I think they had trouble kind of setting the whole thing up, and even some of the camera angles were off, and it definitely wasn't like what you would see today. And there was also this weird kind of high-pitched echo in the audio. I think just being in a building that big and the acoustics and everything, it wasn't translating that well on TV, and a lot of the entrance music and, Howard Finkel on the microphone just sounded a little different. And I remember discussing this with my friends during the pay-per-view saying, hey man, this audio sounds like shit. But the show opened with an Intercontinental title match. Champion Triple H, or Hunter Hearst Helmsley as he was still called back then, taking on Goldust. Goldust had won the Intercontinental title at the previous year's Royal Rumble, defeating Razor Ramon. Now he's a babyface, and he's challenging Triple H for it. Now the build-up to this was Goldust's initial babyface turn, which I think came in late 96, and that's when like Jerry Lawler called him a queer on TV. I mean, you would never see anything like that now. But Goldust, like I said, recently babyface, and Triple H was a heel, and he was kind of in a transitional period. Triple H had just won the belt a couple of months before, beating Mark Marrow when Mr. Perfect turned heel. But right after that, Perfect jetted, left, went off to WCW, leaving Hunter Hearst Helmsley all by himself. So when he makes his entrance at the Royal Rumble, he does not come alone. Mr. Hughes was tagging along with him. Mr. Hughes, I guess, had returned to the company. They had re-signed him and put him with Triple H. They were calling him his butler at first, and this was an incredibly short-lived alliance. I mean, I remember when he came out, we all kind of looked at each other like, really, Mr. Hughes? You went from Mr. Perfect to Mr. Hughes? I don't recall how long this alliance lasted, but I think by the next pay-per-view, we had seen the debut of Chyna, so this was something that lasted just a couple of weeks at the most. And Mr. Hughes does get involved a little bit, so does Marlena. They're both involved, both standing up on the apron. Goldust, I think at one point, takes Marlena's cigar and shoves it right in the face of Mr. Hughes, and that allowed Triple H to kind of sneak in from behind and clothesline him and then hit him with the pedigree and pin him and retain the title. So I remember being happy at the time that they were going to continue on with Triple H's title run. I liked him as Intercontinental Champion. I thought he was a solid piece of talent even back then. So Triple H retains the title. He would wind up dropping that title just a few weeks later, actually, to Rocky during that Thursday Raw Thursday show when Shawn forfeited the title. The next match was one that was about 6 to 7 months in the making. Farouk versus Ahmed Johnson. Now, Farouk, Ron Simmons, had come into the WWE the prior summer, and he attacked Ahmed Johnson on Monday Night Raw and kicked him, and actually caused some kidney damage. I think Ahmed ruptured a kidney or something like that. He was right in the middle of his Intercontinental title run at the time, and he had to forfeit the belt. They had a tournament for it, I believe. And it sucked, because I was a pretty big Ahmed fan at that time. During his initial run and push, and when he was Intercontinental Champion, I actually liked him. I was sad that he got injured. Sadly, he would never be the same after that, and became pretty much a joke and was out of the business just a couple of years later. So that injury was awful. And Ron Simmons is a really respected guy. It was just a freak accident. He's not rough or stiff or reckless in there or anything like that. Ahmed got hurt, and it was really unfortunate. And the whole feud was really strange, because if you remember, Farouk came in wearing that silly-ass outfit. First of all, changing his name to begin with was completely retarded. It was still WWE's mentality back then that the fans aren't going to know who these guys are, and they might as well change his name, and they didn't want to have any association with WCW or NWA or anything like that. Farouk was a former world champion as Ron Simmons in WCW, and they're going to bring him in and completely change his name and look and pretend that this guy is not Ron Simmons and the fans aren't going to recognize him. Now, I do think they acknowledged that he was Ron Simmons, but he had just, changed his identity and, found a new calling or whatever. But how the hell did they come up with that outfit? Look at that shit. How in the world do you have a guy try that on and say, oh yeah, that looks great, he's going to be WWE champion? Luckily, that shit didn't last very long. Farouk kind of shed that whole thing and formed the Nation of Domination during Ahmed's time on the shelf with the injury. He had added Crush and Savio Vega. PG-13 came in from the USWA, and those guys were horrible, and they would rap down to the ring, which I actually liked. I mean, that was something we hadn't really seen before. The Nation's music would hit, and they would do that rap, and Farouk would walk behind him, and with all of his cohorts, D'Lo Brown was in there, and Clarence Mason, and then they had a few other, just fillers, guys who you never knew who they were. They were just out there in suits in support of Farouk. So this whole thing got rolling while Ahmed was injured. And then he starts getting healthier and starts coming back. Ahmed even attacks Farouk a couple of times on Monday Night Raw, attacked him once backstage, I think at one of the pay-per-views. They did plenty of promos together. Farouk and Ahmed were on Livewire. Remember Livewire? Back in the day, that was 96, and they would take calls from the audience, and it was live. It would be on Saturday mornings or maybe Sunday mornings, and it was right at the beginning of the internet. They would do emails and faxes and all sorts of crazy shit. And I remember the two of them having a really heated phone confrontation as well. I think Ahmed was in the studio and Ron Simmons was on the phone. So the build-up was pretty good. Ahmed was out for revenge. Farouk put him on the shelf and was taking credit for it. And there was some bad blood there, and you thought these guys were really going to kill each other. And finally, they build to the big match at the Royal Rumble. Ahmed is finally healthy enough to get back in the ring. Farouk makes his big grand entrance, and all 20 members of the Nation are with him. And then Ahmed Johnson comes out. They start brawling. They have a pretty sloppy match. I mean, Ahmed was not great. I liked Ahmed's look. I liked Ahmed's intensity, but as far as his in-ring work, it was not that good. And Ron Simmons was a strong competitor and a very good athlete, but even his work had declined at that time. He was getting older. He was late 30s probably by that point. Ahmed was green. Ahmed was sloppy. The match was sloppy. And there were a few dangerous points in that match where either one of these guys could have gotten hurt. It's not like I was expecting to see head scissors and takedowns or anything like that. I knew it was going to be a brawl, and the brawl had its moments. But I still don't give the in-ring work in this match a whole lot of praise. After a lot of back and forth, Ahmed finally has Farouk right where he wants him, setting him up for his finisher or whatever. And then, of course, the entire nation jumps in, Crush, Savio, everybody's in there, a big brawl. Ahmed somehow manages to fight off much of the nation and they all retreat. And then he gets his hands on one of the random guys at the very end. Drags him all the way over to, I think, the French announce table and then sets up the stairs and then gives the guy his finisher, his Pearl River Plunge, which is kind of like a double underhook power bomb right through the table, and a pretty sick bump. And that was back when it was just the straight flat tables and all those big heavy metal monitors were there, and the monitors went flying up in the air and completely buried the guy. So it was a pretty sick looking bump. And still, back then, 97, table bumps were getting more frequent, but they were still not that common. So I guess it was a pretty good spot, and it helped what was kind of a weak match. The Undertaker had a rare loss at this pay-per-view. He took on Vader in a one-on-one match. Now, this match I think was stemming from, I can't remember how they built to it, but I believe Jim Cornette was taken off of TV. He was going to be no longer managing Vader, and they were going to put him on the creative team full time. So they ran an angle on TV, I think it was Superstars, where The Undertaker tombstoned Jim Cornette, and that was a way to kind of write him off of TV. So now Vader has no manager. He's out there one-on-one versus The Undertaker, and during the match, Paul Bearer shows up. Paul Bearer had turned on The Undertaker the previous summer at SummerSlam, aligning himself with Mankind, and now he comes out there, I guess just to kind of help out Vader, and there were some really silly spots in this match. Undertaker, as soon as he notices Paul Bearer, he jumps out of the ring and decks him and knocks him down. And then somehow Paul Bearer finds his way up on the apron, and he takes the urn and he jumps off the apron and hits the Undertaker in the back of the head with it, and then fall backwards. If I can remember, I'll put a clip of that up on the screen so you can see. And just the way he kind of watched. So, bless his heart, Paul Bearer had me cracking up laughing out loud during that spot. But believe it or not, that was pretty much the blow that ended this match for Undertaker. Right after that, Undertaker was thrown in the ring by Vader and set up for the Vader bomb, and Vader nailed him with it and got the 1-2-3 and the victory, and also revealing that Paul Bearer is now the new manager of Vader. So in 2 of the first 3 matches on the show, we had guys getting new managers, which was kind of ironic. So since Jim Cornette was off of TV, they were going to give Vader to Paul Bearer, and that's the way they set all this up. And I remember being pretty shocked. You did not see The Undertaker get pinned that often. It was still a very rare thing to see. And I was actually happy looking back that Vader got that victory, because we've all heard the stories. Vader was the one that was supposed to be in the main event. The original plan was for Shawn Michaels to drop the title to Vader at Survivor Series, not Sid, and do the same storyline with Jose Lothario getting hurt and Shawn Michaels getting revenge. This was all started back in SummerSlam of 1996 when Shawn and Vader had that big match, and Shawn didn't want to work with him anymore, and he was being an asshole. Shawn was a huge piece of shit back then, and he completely kiboshed the entire push that Vader was going to get. Vader was supposed to win the WWE title, and Shawn Michaels essentially took that away from him. So at least Vader was able to get a victory over an icon in the WWE at the Royal Rumble. It wasn't the main event versus Shawn, but it was a victory over a very major name in the WWE, so I guess that's something. Next match, we had a big 6-man tag with some more AAA guys. Hector Garza, Pero Aguayo Sr., and Connect defeated Jerry Estrada, Heavy Metal, and Fuerza Guerrera. And during this match, JR even referenced that Pero Aguayo's son, Pero Aguayo Jr., did wrestle in a non-televised match earlier on in the show, and that he was 17. So it was cool to hear JR make mention of that. Again, this was a match that kind of fell flat with the crowd. I mean, it is in San Antonio geographically. These fans should be a little bit more knowledgeable of Mexican wrestling than maybe somebody in Minnesota or something like that. But still, I didn't personally see how this was going to benefit the WWE in the long run. They were trying a lot of different things back then to compete with WCW, and this was just a failed experiment. Moving on now to the Royal Rumble match itself. This was one of those Royal Rumbles where the Royal Rumble was not the main event. Every now and then we get a big title match or something like that that overshadows the Royal Rumble match itself, and this was one of those years. But this was still a relatively entertaining Royal Rumble. And probably for me personally, the best part of the Royal Rumble was the awesome performance by Stone Cold Steve Austin. So I'll go ahead and run through a few of the highlights here, talk about some of the significant entrants and some of the stuff we saw. Now, the Royal Rumble match kicked off with some more technical difficulties. The first two guys in the match were Crush and Ahmed Johnson. Crush drew number 1 and Ahmed drew number 2. This was perfect because Ahmed had worked with Farouk earlier on in the show, so they can continue this feud and this angle that's going on. And I also liked the fact that everybody that had a match earlier on in the show was also in the Royal Rumble. Sometimes they've done this in the past and sometimes they have not. I remember specifically a couple of years, I know 95, one of them for sure, they did not have these guys wrestle twice, and it really hurt the Royal Rumble. The year Shawn won it the first time, in 95, that was a really weak Royal Rumble because everybody that had matches earlier on in the night, King Kong Bundy, The Undertaker, Bam Bam Bigelow, Tatanka, 1-2-3 Kid, all sorts of stars on their roster, none of them were in the Royal Rumble, and it made the Rumble weak as shit. So it was nice to see that they were going back to letting these guys compete twice in one night. The countdown clock wasn't working during the beginning of the match, and I think a little bit longer than 90 seconds went by. This Royal Rumble, I believe it was 1.5 minute intervals between entrants. I know they've fluctuated that up and down over the years. Sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's even 1 minute. I think in 95, actually, was the year they did 1 minute, and the whole Royal Rumble itself was only like 30 minutes long. So this year it was 90 seconds, but it seemed like Crush and Ahmed were out there for a long time before number 3 came down, and it was Razor Ramon, the fake Razor Ramon. And he came out to no music because I guess they had problems with that too. They were going to be playing entrance music as guys came out. They started that trend actually in 96. That was the first year that they would play the wrestler's entrance theme when it was their turn to come out. So unfortunately, this was our last chance to hear Razor Ramon's theme music in the WWE, and we didn't even get to hear it. I don't think Razor or Diesel, for that matter, made another appearance in the WWE under those gimmicks after this show. Maybe once or something if they wrestled a house show, but basically after the Rumble, they were gone. And they made pretty quick work of fake Razor too. Ahmed Johnson pretty much immediately threw him right over the top rope and symbolically, I guess, threw him out of the WWE as well. Every year it seems like WWE has to have somebody eliminate themselves, and in this Royal Rumble we actually had this happen a couple of times. Ahmed was the first one to do it. Farouk appeared in the aisleway just a couple of minutes later, and Ahmed just hopped right over the top rope and chased Farouk down the aisleway, essentially eliminating himself. And now the magic was about to begin because I think either the 5th or 6th entrant was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He came out there and started kicking the shit out of everybody, eliminating Phineas, eliminating Bart Gunn. He was all by himself in the ring, waiting for the next guy to come out. And I'll tell you what, the best part of the entire Royal Rumble to me, it made my thumbnail for this video, is when Austin sat on the top rope, waiting for the next guy to come out, and he looked at his watch. I mean, I remember laughing in unison with everybody that was in my house that night. I spit beer out of my nose. Austin was getting in the ring and he was doing push-ups and he was just mocking the crowd. And then when Jake the Snake Roberts' music hit, he jumped off the top rope and got in the middle of the ring and got down on his hands and knees and started praying. It was fucking hilarious. And Jake gets back up in the ring and gets some offense on Stone Cold, and then the ring starts to beef up again with a lot more guys. A lot of AAA guys were in this as well, and it sucked because when they came down to the ring, the fans really didn't know who they were. They were just using generic theme music. A couple of these guys just came out to the Royal Rumble pay-per-view theme song that I used in the intro here. You had guys like Cibernetico, Piroth, Latin Lover, and Mil Mascaras. And Mil Mascaras is a guy with a terrible reputation for never wanting to do business. And I remember hearing stories about this Royal Rumble and how he basically insisted that if he's going to get eliminated, he's going to eliminate himself. He was no-selling everything, too, in the match. I remember at one point, Rikishi, or the Sultan, just grabbed a hold of him and gave him a belly-to-belly, and he was, like, fighting it the whole time. Mil Mascaras was just an asshole. So finally he ends up, I forget who he's fighting with, Latin Lover, one of the AAA guys. They go outside the ring. He climbs up to the top rope and dives off on top of him to the ring floor and eliminates himself. So Mil Mascaras is gone. Good riddance, fuck off, and never come back. The strongest mix of talent came about, you know, midway to 3/4 of the way through the Royal Rumble when we had guys like Owen and the Bulldog and Triple H and Farouk and Mark Marrow. They were all out there. Farouk gets eliminated when Ahmed shows back up because, of course, he chased him away earlier. Shows back up with a 2x4 when Farouk is in the ring, and Farouk gets eliminated and they continue their brawl. So I did like the fact that they kept that going with Ahmed and Farouk all night, really building up the bad blood, and that nothing was really settled in the previous match. And Ahmed and Farouk, you know, they were fighting with each other 3 different times throughout the duration of this pay-per-view, which I thought was actually really well done. A lot of guys were getting eliminated during the chaos with Ahmed Johnson's 2x4. Owen Hart actually threw the British Bulldog out. I think Triple H and Goldust might have eliminated each other. Whatever wound up happening, everybody was over the top rope and everybody was gone except for Stone Cold Steve Austin laying in the ring all by himself again. And this time he's a little bit more spent, so he's not really that arrogant or that cocky waiting for the next guy to come out. And I think the next one is Savio Vega, which he makes quick work of and tosses him right over the top rope. He has a lot of history with Savio, and then he's sitting there all by himself again. Next one to come out, Jesse James, the former Road Dogg. Back when he was doing the new Double J gimmick with that horrible song, he comes out there, Austin throws him out in about 5 seconds, and then he's sitting there waiting for the next guy to come out again. And that's when we see Bret Hart and the classic reaction by Stone Cold when he's sitting up on the top rope and Bret's music hits and he puts his hands on his head in disbelief, but he stands up, he gets right in the middle of the ring and he calls Bret in and he goes, "Bring it on, motherfucker," and the two of them start brawling. What I like about this, they basically had him face everybody that he had a significant amount of history with. He was in there all by himself waiting for that guy to come out. First, it was Jake the Snake Roberts, who Austin defeated in the finals of the King of the Ring the previous year, and that led to the whole Austin 316 promo. Without that feud with Jake, we might not have had Austin 316 t-shirts. So that was a very significant opponent in Stone Cold's past. Prior to him becoming that Austin 316 badass, he was feuding with Savio Vega. That was the next guy to come out and confront Austin when he's all alone. He had a feud with him when he first came into the WWE, managed by the $1 Million Man, and they had that strap match and they worked WrestleMania and all of that. And then the third guy, of course, Bret the Hitman Hart, probably his most famous feud in the WWE up until that point, worked with Bret when he returned at Survivor Series 96, and they had a really heated feud going on at the time. So I really like that they threw that in there, that every time Austin was by himself, he had to face guys that he's had a ton of heat with. That was just a nice little added touch that someone like me really appreciated. And watching the fans go nuts for Bret. I mean, he came out there and him and Austin were just trading rights and lefts. Bret winds up getting Austin down and puts him in the sharpshooter as the clock is about to expire. And the next one to come out was Jerry the King Lawler, who's sitting at commentary calling the match with Jim Ross and Vince McMahon. And they try to do, it was kind of amusing. It didn't really work, but Jerry Lawler basically started a sentence when his music started playing. He goes, "Hey Vince, it takes a king," and then he puts his headset down, gets in the ring, Bret sees him coming, lets go of the sharpshooter, spins around and uppercuts Jerry Lawler right out of the ring over the top rope. Lawler was in the ring for about 1.5 seconds, and he immediately gets back up, puts his jacket back on, puts the headset back on, and finishes the sentence that he started before he got in the ring. Kind of amusing, but Vince was like overselling it, and Vince was really trying to hammer home the point that King got hit so hard that he kind of forgot where the fuck he was. And then throughout the duration of the match, Lawler was acting like he didn't remember being in there. And now we get the ring beefing up for the final time of the match, and now it's really loaded with some talent. We had Bret Hart, we had Stone Cold Steve Austin, we had a young Rock, we had Mankind, we had Terry Funk came back to the WWE and made an appearance in this match in Texas. We also had Diesel, or Glenn Jacobs, Kane. The fake Diesel was in there for his final appearance in the WWE. We had Vader, and we had The Undertaker. So this was a big final group of guys here, and it was pretty much anybody's game. And of course, we remember how the whole thing ended. Bret Hart just simply picks up Austin and throws him right over the top rope. But Terry Funk and Mankind are so busy brawling on the other side of the ring after they eliminated each other. The referees are trying to break it all up and they don't see Austin get eliminated. So he comes back in the ring, dumps over Vader and The Undertaker, who are jostling for position on the ropes, and then he sneaks up from behind Bret and tosses him out, and the referees award the match to Stone Cold Steve Austin. His music plays, he's the winner, there's no instant replay, there's nothing they can do. And what I loved is that Bret Hart went absolutely apeshit. Bret was already starting to lose his mind. He came back and he was getting fucked over time and time again in some of his title matches, and now he's got a chance to win the Royal Rumble, go on to main event WrestleMania, and because of some weird-ass fluke, Austin is able to pull a fast one and somehow steal a victory away, and he's pissed. He even goes on the outside of the ring and starts grabbing Vince, and that was something that wasn't done yet. And he was basically blaming Vince for the whole thing, grabbing his jacket and frustrated and pissed off, and he's just losing his mind. And the next night on Raw is when he would come out and actually quit. He opened the show, cut a shoot promo on Vince McMahon and the WWE, and says that he quits. And that's when Gorilla Monsoon had to come out and say, okay, we're going to give you a chance. We're going to take the last 4 guys that were in the Royal Rumble. Austin won this thing unfairly, so we're going to have a 4-way match, and the winner of that will go on to face the champion at WrestleMania or whatever. So they would do that the next night. But watching Brett freak out, watching Austin steal a victory in such a classic early heel Stone Cold Steve Austin type of way, I actually really liked it. I mean, I'm a Bret Hart mark, you guys know that, and I was definitely rooting for him to win the Royal Rumble, but I remember not being as mad about it because I was still an Austin fan, and I loved the feud between the two, and I kind of liked the finish. It was just something different. It's something that we had not seen. We had never seen a guy steal a victory in the Royal Rumble. Of course, all of WWE's plans would be completely blown up after Shawn lost his smile and forfeited the title, and that 4-way match at the next pay-per-view became a title match instead of a number 1 contender match, but, still the whole thing and how they led to it was pretty well done. Speaking of Shawn Michaels, he was in the main event, of course. Hometown boy returning to San Antonio to try to gain revenge on Sid for not only taking the belt off of him, but hurting his mentor, Jose Lothario, beating up Jose Lothario's kid, Pete Lothario, and just being an overall dickbag to everybody he comes in contact with. And had a pretty entertaining run despite the fact that it was a short one. I always liked Sid. I always liked badass Sid. I didn't really like him when he was back the first time in 95. He was just kind of like a weak character. He was so big when he was Sid Justice in the WWE in 91, and then when he returned in 95 as Shawn's bodyguard, it just felt like something was missing. Kevin Nash was the big 7-footer in town, and they were, I thought, kind of holding Sid back a little bit. I just thought Sid had an awesome look. I thought he was good on the mic. He was intense. His, just his physical size was very intimidating, and I always thought the guy could have been bigger. So when he returned in 96 and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were gone, he had a chance to shine here, and they gave him a title match and did the heel turn and the whole deal, and he looked great with that WWE title. I always thought that the WWE Winged Eagle belt looked really good around Sid's waist. It just fit him nicely. And he was being such a dick, completely remorseless for what he did to Jose Lothario and even beating up his son on an episode of Monday Night Raw leading up to the Royal Rumble. So this whole thing was centered around Shawn Michaels. And the interesting thing is, Shawn Michaels had the flu during this match. He was sick as a dog. Even during the free-for-all, they interviewed him, and he looked pale. He looked pasty. He sounded like shit, and he acknowledged that. But he said he's going to be ready to go and good enough to beat Sid in the main event. His parents were in the front row. They were treated to some pretty entertaining shit. I remember seeing Shawn's dad kind of laughing and kind of marking out for the Bret Hart and Austin confrontation in the Rumble and stuff. So his parents were there the whole time and looked like they legitimately enjoyed the show. And Shawn, of course, came out to Sexy Boy. They were also billing this as the final time that Jose Lothario would be in Shawn Michaels' corner. So Shawn wasn't going to have to worry about dragging him around anymore. And I always thought the two of them didn't match anyway. And his entrance was pretty epic. The crowd was going crazy for him. His music was playing. He was basking in all the glory. He kissed his mother on his way into the ring. The whole thing was very well done. And Sid, of course, I always loved when Sid's name was lit up in fireworks. I just always liked Sid's entrance. I liked his theme music. I liked his intensity, the way he would just kind of fist bump people as he came down to the ring. And then he would get in the ring and go, "Who's the man?" And the big SID would light up in sparklers and fireworks. It was just really cool. I just always enjoyed Sid's entrance. And the match wasn't horrible. Shawn really kept it together. For a guy that had the flu, man, he was working pretty hard in this match. The finish was really well done and kind of came full circle. Sid had been teasing all night that he was going to attack Jose Lothario on the outside of the ring, and he did get his hands on him at one point. Jose's son was in the front row and hopped over the guardrail, and Sid had them both in like a double chokehold, and then Shawn dove over the top rope to attack Sid. So they had a lot of good moments during this match, but the final spot saw the referee, which I think was Earl, got knocked out. And then Shawn Michaels picked up the camera from the outside of the ring, grabbed the camera right off a cameraman's shoulders, got in the ring with it, and nailed Sid with it twice. Just like Sid did to him at Survivor Series, and then Shawn lays on him to pin him, and I think another referee came down to count the 3, but Sid kicks out. A nice, dramatic near fall. All the fans thought it was over, and there was a collective like, "Aw," when Sid kicked out. And then Sid attacked that referee, who wasn't even really the original referee to begin with. And then Shawn backed up and nailed him with a super kick. Caught Sid right underneath his massive chin, and Earl comes to and starts counting the 3 very slowly, but finally does hit the final 3 count. You can even hear Vince going, "Come on, referee, like, get to it." And finally, his hand came down for the 3 count, and the crowd went nuts. Shawn's music started playing. He regained the title. He celebrated his ass off outside of the ring, hugging all of his family members, even hugging Vince. And the show went off the air with Shawn kind of just doing a victory lap around the ring. So it was a really good moment for Shawn Michaels. I remember being so happy that he regained the belt. It was a pretty good story and something that was set in motion months before, and I think it worked out pretty good. Even though the original plans were for Vader to be there, I think it worked out just as good, if not better, with Sid, because I was always a big Sid fan. And then it gets a little murky after that. The story goes is that Sid was going to win the belt back at the Thursday Raw from Shawn, but then he lost his smile and forfeited the belt instead, and they had the 4-way for it. So I guess the original plan was for Sid to beat Shawn and then go defend it against Undertaker, and for Shawn and Bret to have a non-title match at WrestleMania 13 is what I'm guessing. Sid would wind up getting the belt back just a few weeks later. He would beat Bret Hart the night after the Final Four when Bret Hart won the WWE title for the 4th time. He only held it for 1 day. Sid beat him the next night on Raw when Austin interfered and hit Bret with a chair. So that's pretty impressive when you think about it. Sid beat Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart to win his 2 WWE titles. So that's pretty cool. And of course, he would go on to drop that belt to a much-deserved Undertaker at WrestleMania 13 about a month later. So looking back at this Royal Rumble, it's just like what I said in the beginning. It wasn't the greatest Royal Rumble we've ever seen. I don't even know if it makes the top 10, but I think enough things happen in the show and it was memorable enough to where it should at least be ranked up there, because I have fond memories of it. I remember this day fondly nearly 20 years ago. I still can't believe that's how long it's been. And it was a time in wrestling that I sorely missed. So I always enjoy going back and taking a look at some of these shows from the past. It's one of my favorite things to do here on the channel. So thank you for joining me again and taking this trip down memory lane with me. If you have any memories of this pay-per-view, if you were old enough to remember it, if you were even born, I don't know, let me know some of your thoughts about it in the comments below. Thank you so much again for listening and all of your support, and I will talk to you guys in the very near future. Until next time, peace.